Deeply perplexed by the absurdities and problems of existence, 19th-century theologian and philosopher Søren Kierkegaard is considered by most to be the father of existentialism. His work examines themes common to this current of thought, provoking and trying to resolve the falsehoods of tradition and convention, the inconsistency between people's true selves and how they act in the world, and the despair and anxiety that is so ingrained in all of this. Kierkegaard was born in 1813 in Denmark as the youngest of 7 children in a very wealthy family. From an early age, he was exposed to philosophical thought since his father was also very interested in philosophy. For this reason, his father often studied and had conversations related to theory, logic, science, and ethics in the presence of young Kierkegaard. In early adulthood, he would study philosophy and theology at the University of Copenhagen. However, he would soon find that he disliked and distanced himself from the historical and philosophical works to which he was exposed, as he often considered them excessively intellectualized and incongruent with life as it is lived in the world. In reality, what I really need to do, he wrote, is to clarify what I should do and not what I should know. This evaluation would ultimately define the orientation in which Kierkegaard would direct his philosophical efforts. Also possibly significant for this orientation, at the age of 22, 5 of his 6 brothers had already died, plunging his childhood and early youth into the disturbing shadow of tragedy and impermanence, reminding him 5 times that life is synonymous with uncertainty and that the worst could be around the corner. Around and after this stage of his midlife, at 20 years old, Kierkegaard began writing at an immensely productive pace, producing many books during his life under various pseudonyms as well as under his own name. All this he did before he died in 1855 at the age of 42, probably due to a horrible case of spinal tuberculosis. In terms of his philosophical work, one of Kierkegaard's most notable and profound contributions, and the one we mainly focus on here, was what he would call anxiety in his book The Concept of Anxiety. He would describe this term as a particular feeling of anxiety and fear, not an anxiety disorder in the clinical sense, but rather the underlying existential anxiety that permeates the human condition as a whole. Anxiety is a heightened emotional response to a perceived threat or challenge, especially one that is unknown or uncertain. Therefore, both anxiety of this existential type, that from now on we will simply call anxiety, is the response to the threat, the challenge, or the fear of the unknown and the uncertainty of existence as a whole. More specifically, it is the feeling of freedom and responsibility that one has within this uncertainty. In the words of Kierkegaard, anguish is the vertigo of freedom. In every moment, we are possessed by an awareness of our freedom, or at least the feeling of freedom, to choose and be responsible. The almost infinite unknowns and possibilities of life become known and real through our choices and actions, but nevertheless, we are given very little information and ideas necessary for us to position ourselves appropriately in situations. Even worse, perhaps there is no way to make decisions correctly in the way we expect. Even when we take them correctly, we are largely driven by our anxiety to make decisions that will eliminate our anxiety. But possibly, if we have lived and thought long enough about this, we realize that we are and will continue to be condemned to a life inevitably affected by at least some form of anguish. It is as if we were always at an intersection between the past and the future, with a steering wheel, a dashboard of dials, and an off switch, but no brake, accelerator, reverse, map, or navigation system. We continually see ourselves forced to travel the world in this vehicle, but the world is covered by an immense and thick fog. Naturally, we hope that in some directions we choose, the fog will clear. But it never does, at least not completely. Kierkegaard wrote, "Anyone who really knows humanity could say that there is not a single human being alive who does not feel desperate, even a little. There is no human who does not secretly harbor a restlessness, an internal struggle, a lack of harmony, an anxiety about something unknown or something that does not even dare to try knowing, an anxiety about some possibility in existence or an anxiety about oneself." Recognizing the inevitability of anxiety and fear, Kierkegaard sought to make sense and usefulness of it. Despite how bleak everything may sound up to this point, he did not believe that anxiety was entirely negative. Rather, he believed that anxiety was a necessary part of life, and our response to it was what made the difference between a life lived fully and a life of despair. Understanding the feeling of vertigo caused by anxiety, it can often be paralyzing to move forward while your head is spinning. It's not exactly ideal, so this feeling of freedom to choose and do anything in life can sometimes prevent us from choosing or doing anything at all. Just imagine the anxiety it can cause, having a big, scary item on our to-do list and how this could prevent us from tackling what we need to do. Anxiety-induced paralysis evokes not only our to-do list but the responsibilities we have to manage daily and the consequences that can lead to not completing what we have to do. All of this generates worry and anxiety. So it is very understandable, but our head will never stop spinning, And if we want to achieve a potentially fuller life and improve ourselves to a better version of who we really are, we should not succumb to the inaction of this anxiety. To retain some sense of power over our lives and gain some meaning from the self, we must maintain the ability to move forward and act in the face of this anxiety. Furthermore, one could argue that it is this anxiety, or perhaps the source of this anxiety, that allows for any possibility of developing and deriving a unique and meaningful self. Without any possibility, there would be no anxiety, but without anxiety, there would be no possibility. Kierkegaard suggested that to make the most of anxiety and live well with it, the individual must pursue what he would call passion. This could take the form of things like love, a creative endeavor, a family, personal growth, a career, an ideology, a belief, and so on. What is important for Kierkegaard, however, is that one orients one's passions based on subjective truth. In other words, truths that are considered true by the individual, not truths that necessarily have objective merit. It is not primarily a question of intellectualization but also a question of emotional and subjective experience. As he wrote, "The crucial thing is to find a truth that is true for me, the idea for which I am willing to live and die." The individual must discover his subjective truth and then fully commit to it regardless of reason or intellectual certainty. The individual, if he wants to overcome the despair of anxiety, must do something for his own good. This, in modern times, is better known as taking a leap of faith. Often, through conformity, distractions, addictions, and any other form of avoidance, people attempt to avoid the anxiety and responsibility of their existence by universally conforming to the status quo. One tries to free oneself from the responsibility of one's choices, and through things like substance abuse, the search for social status, superficial action, materialism, and other distractions, one tries to avoid the reality that there is no way to truly free oneself from it. For Kierkegaard, the development of the self depends on the ability to confront the anxiety of existence and move forward with it. For him, in an otherwise meaningless existence, is where meaning can potentially be found. The consequences of giving into anxiety and inaction for Kierkegaard are much worse. The result of falling prey to anxiety and inaction is simply despair, which is a depressive and apathetic state, a failed self, lost and unrealized, a frictional experience of existence. In the words of modern psychoanalyst James Hollis, anxiety is the ticket price for life. Intrapsychic depression is the byproduct of refusal to get on board. One must realize that life will never become more solid or less scary. There will never be a perfect, optimal time to make the decision to get on board. If life is a sequence of decisions made impossible by uncertainty, we might as well try to justify it by making decisions that pursue the greatest and most interesting heights and depths of the unknown that we are capable of exploring. Kierkegaard's framework and solution to this problem was faith in the Christian God, but his philosophy, in part, could provide a premise that is applicable to any subjective view of meaning and purpose, especially today. Anxiety is often perceived as wrong and negative, a malady or illness, but anxiety is possibly a fundamental ingredient rooted in the experience of human consciousness. To feel and think is to be anxious. After the above, the following question truly arises: how could we not be anxious? It is a natural question to an intensely disturbing, confusing, and uncertain existence in which we are assigned an unsolicited role. And the more access we get to options in the modern world, we are only left with more reasons to worry and dwell on anxiety, for more ways in which we hope to calm it, as well as more ways to feel responsible when we inevitably don't. But as Kierkegaard suggested, we must do our best to learn to live with and through this anxiety, keep moving forward into the unknown, and take our leaps of faith in what we truly and personally believe makes it all worthwhile. The goal of it all is to truly have a personal purpose for which we can truly live and die without regret. As we learn from Søren Kierkegaard, anguish is an expression of the perfection of human nature. It is the longing in the earthly life for a life beyond. Kierkegaard's philosophy suggests that anxiety, rather than being something purely negative, can be an important part of our journey towards self-realization and purpose. He believed that anxiety arises from the sense of freedom and responsibility we have in making choices amidst life's uncertainties. This sense of freedom, however, can be overwhelming, leading to what he calls the dizziness of freedom. In every moment, we are aware of our freedom to choose, and with that comes the responsibility of how our choices shape our lives. This awareness can lead to a feeling of vertigo, as we confront the infinite possibilities and unknowns before us. The challenge, according to Kierkegaard, is to navigate this anxiety without succumbing to paralysis or despair. One way to overcome the despair of anxiety is through passion, whether it be love, creativity, personal growth, or any other pursuit that aligns with what Kierkegaard calls subjective truth. This truth is not necessarily something that can be objectively proven but is instead something that resonates deeply with the individual, providing a sense of meaning and purpose. Kierkegaard argued that to live a full life, One must embrace this subjective truth and commit to it fully, even if it means taking a leap of faith. This leap of faith often involves moving beyond conformity, distractions, and avoidance, and instead facing the reality of existence head-on. Ultimately, the key to living well with anxiety is not to eliminate it but to accept it as an integral part of the human experience. By doing so, we can find the courage to move forward, make meaningful choices, and live a life that we can look back on without regret. Remember to subscribe and hit the like button for more videos and to help us reach more people.